everyone. Welcome back to Team Talk Politics. I'm joined here by my co-host Andrew, and I'm Sam. And in today's episode, we're going to be covering the change between the differences in the Democratic and Republican parties from today than from the founding of the nation, and what parties have tended to be more conservative in the past, and what parties have tended to be more liberal. And obviously, still political landscapes change, but we're going to be covering those changes today. And so, we're first going to be starting off with the Republican argument at the time that I think it's very universal to cover the fact that Lincoln was a very good president, and both parties and political groups can probably agree on this, that Lincoln was a fairly good president. He was a president under the that did sign the Emancipation Proclamation. He was able to keep the nation together during the Civil War, and was overall a decent president. I think Andrew, you'd say the same.
Yeah.
And but the Republican argument to the current day is that they justify their actions by saying, as you put, "We are the party of Lincoln." Yes, you are. Good job for stating the obvious. But it's not all that obvious of what Lincoln supported at the time, and what policies would place Lincoln either more liberal or conservative. And as we know today, Republicans tend to be more conservative, while Democrats tend to be more liberal. I'm not saying this is a set in stone, like law or something, but it is kind of a very common note, I believe. And so, Andrew, could you tell us a bit about the difference between what the Republican Party at the time of Lincoln was and what they stood for and what they stand for now?
Yeah, so the Republican Party, back when Lincoln was president, yes, there was a split between progressives and conservatives. However, they were on the left wing of the political spectrum. Lincoln wanted to get rid of slavery. That was a progressive idea at the time. So he would have been considered a progressive, and he was. The Republican Party of today, they would not say that Lincoln was progressive because it would look bad on their party because they are more conservative, way, way conservative nowadays. And Lincoln just wasn't conservative. He had many progressive ideas that wouldn't be popular in the Republican Party anymore. So I really think the argument against Lincoln being part of the Republican Party, it is just not the same Republican Party as it is today. He is a progressive. The Republican Party today is not a progressive. If Lincoln was actually here today, he was running for president, does anyone honestly believe he would be running on the Republican Party? Definitely not. He's a progressive. He's not going to be running against a party that is traditionally conservative. So I really don't get that argument. Yes, they had the same title. Yes, they were all Republicans. That does not mean they had the same ideology whatsoever. Another big name that they say is Reagan. Yes, he was a conservative. However, he was a very different conservative. So saying, oh, this person was in my party, so this is making my argument worth more, and this is why my argument works and yours doesn't, just that kind of excuse for having a bad argument and having bad policies, saying, oh, Lincoln would support it because he was in my party, Reagan would support it because he was in my party, because both Lincoln wasn't necessarily that popular during his time, however, he did a lot of good things while he was president.
And we're also not trying to say that Republicans today would support slavery, or at least most.
Right, but if Republicans of today, I don't know if I'll try to explain this the best, but if Republicans of today, conservative Republicans, they lived back during the times of slavery, late 1700s, early 1800s, and they saw slavery, do you think they would have supported getting rid of slavery or wanted to keep it? Mm-hmm. They like to conserve their traditional values, which would include slavery.
Yep, and that's conservacy for you.
Right. Democrats weren't necessarily conservative, but they were way more conservative than Republicans were in during Lincoln's era, they would probably have been considered conservative at the time. Maybe not even close to how conservative Republicans are today. However, yes, they were conservative. And they were all in the Deep South, where slavery was legal until the Emancipation Proclamation. And I think that's a really good thing to get across is, we've said this many times so far, but Lincoln just isn't in the same political party as it is today. He would not have ran as a Republican in today's society. Mm-hmm. He would have probably, I'm assuming, run as a Democrat because that's the Progressive Party. And that's, of course, the Green Party is more progressive. However, that's not big names, and not many big names run in the Green Party. However, I don't think he would run as a Republican, and I think that's quite clear. And then the argument with Reagan is, yes, he was a conservative, and we can admit that he would be running under the Republican Party even today. However, his kids are against Trump and pro the Democrat Party, which is very unusual because most presidents' children, they support policies that their parents would have supported, and also they would be in the same political party. So this is very unusual for kids of the most well-known conservative president to be under the Democrat Party. So it's interesting to see. Mm-hmm. So I think it's important for us to go way back and really look about what happened with the Republican Party and why it became this progressive battleground. And this is really back when the Whig Party, which I think we're all familiar with. The Whig Party, I think, had how many presidents were under that party? Two or three? Mm-hmm. When that party collapsed, and the reason it collapsed is because they could not decide whether or not they supported the emancipation of slavery, or they wanted to keep it. They couldn't decide, and the party fell into ruins. And that's how the Republican Party rose up, saying, okay, our main focus is to get rid of slavery.
Yeah. And, I mean, it's not obviously their main purpose, but their main purpose was to be more liberal, which liberal tended to be getting rid of slavery, or at least working towards that goal.
Right, and just like the Civil War, the whole point of the Civil War, yes, some people will make the argument it was states' rights, but if slavery had not been an issue, do you think we would have had a Civil War? Probably not. Mm-hmm. So slavery really was the main issue during the Civil War, and the whole point of the Republican Party coming out of the ground from the Whig Party, it's all over slavery. If slavery had not existed, we could still maybe possibly have the Whig Party exist today, but we don't because slavery existed. And they wanted to get rid of slavery, and that's why that rose up as a progressive party. So it just doesn't work. We hold opposite ideologies. Democrats were conservative. Republicans were progressive. Around the late to mid-1900s, they really swapped. Woodrow Wilson was pretty moderate, and then you get to FDR, and he was more progressive, and that's one of the big names of the new progressive Democrat Party. While Republicans started getting more conservative with Eisenhower and then presidents around that time. So yes, the parties will change over time, and they will continue to do it. But I think a lot of these arguments saying, oh, this person was in my party, when they really wouldn't stand for the same party that exists today. So I think that's a major hole in that argument. Right, Sam?
Yeah. I mean, it's very obvious from the evidence presented that it's not the same. And we can kind of shift on to our next bullet point that the white supremacy, kind of talking about what we were talking back, about how you were talking about how the Civil War may have had a different outcome if slavery was still around. We obviously know at the time that Democrats support white supremacy, which is a terrible thing. White supremacy is the ideology that white people are superior to other races. This is not remotely true whatsoever, and it's a faked ideology that some extreme conservatives still carry to this day, and that some even non-extreme people in the current Republican Party still believe this, but or at least push bills that are not in favor of equality. But besides that, the parties were different at the time. That the Democrats were in mass were these, as you were saying, major slave owners. And from the South, while Republicans tended to be more from the North. As we know, this is very different from this position today. As we keep going back to that, it's still a different point. Yet, the white Democrats, as we know, white Democrats today in the House tend to focus more on equality bills, while white Republicans in the House and Senate, have tended to support blocking and filibustering important anti-discrimination acts, bills, whatever. So it's making it extremely difficult, and it's kind of making the Republican Party get even worse and worse as we move into this modern era of equality, and as the rest of the world moves on. Anything you want to say about that?
Right. And if we actually look at historical data with Democrats supporting white supremacy, and you actually look at it, there is a reason why Democrats dominated the South, and that's because of the issue of slavery and white supremacy. They really dominated the South up until basically Eisenhower didn't win the South, JFK won the South, and then when Lyndon B. Johnson came in and signed the Civil Rights Act, we lost all supporters in the South that were still white supremacists that supported the Democrat Party and now switched to the Republican Party. Some notable names is Strom Thurmond. He's notable for trying to filibuster the Civil Rights Act, which is racist. I don't know if you knew that, but that is racist. He changed party affiliations from Democrat to Republican. I wonder why. It's because the Democrats shifted from being this dominantly white party into being more diverse, while the Republican Party stayed with their white base. Another notable name, David Duke. If you don't know who he is, he's like the Grand Wizard of the Ku Klux Klan. Mm-hmm. That's as white as that gets, okay?
Was he the Grand Wizard or the Grand Wizard of Maryland?
Grand Wizard. He was in Louisiana, not Maryland. Mm-hmm. He used to be a Democrat and then switched to the Republican Party. Wonder who he endorsed for president in the 2016 and 2020 election. Donald Trump, okay? And then I don't think that should surprise too many people. With the amount of times where Trump has gotten into these issues with neo-Nazis and white supremacists, it doesn't surprise me that the leader of all white supremacists ended up endorsing him. And I think that really goes into show how much the parties have changed from when the South was dominated by Democrats, and now Republicans dominate the South. I'm talking Louisiana, Mississippi, Alabama. We've not heard of a blue Alabama in a long time. We've not heard of a blue Mississippi in a long time. These string of states that used to be safe for the Democrat Party are now big bases for the Republican Party. Yes, there are signs of the Democrat Party getting more support in these the southern states, and that's because of minorities are now shifting down south. We're talking Georgia that went blue for Biden. That is deep south. Florida, that's a whole other. We don't know what's happening in Florida. It's kind of crazy down there. But then we're talking Alabama. That could narrow up, not likely. Mississippi, that's expected to narrow up. South Carolina is expected to narrow up. Now, North Carolina has been narrow for a while. So you have these states that might be shifting to the left in recent times. Of course, we have several decades to go before anything major happens down there, but that's all from shifting demographics. And another reason why the South was so strongly towards the Democrat Party while we were still the party of white supremacy is really because there were a lot of black people that were still down in the South. But that was primarily because of voter suppression. They weren't allowed to vote, so the white base voted for people that they thought would protect their traditional rights. And I'm putting traditional rights in air quotes because they are not morally correct. Having slaves is not morally correct. It's not right. No. And they are voting for these candidates that think they could bring it back. I'm not talking about daily, like today, because Lindsey Graham is not bringing slavery back. Tommy Tuberville is not bringing slavery back. But I'm talking 100 years ago, right?
Yeah.
So I think it's very interesting to point out really where the parties have lined up. Where traditionally where there were white supremacists in the South, I wonder who they're voting for now. It's the Republican Party. You know who they did vote for? The Democrat Party. That's when the ideologies were completely swapped.
Yep.
Democrats on the right, Republicans on the left. Now today it's Democrats on the left, more progressive wing, and then you have Republicans on the right, more conservative wing. So I think white supremacy really just falls in lines of these ideologies, of who's going to conserve the traditional basis and traditions of its older America when slavery was a thing.
Yep.
I think that's a big basis of conservatism. Of course, many conservatives are going to argue differently, but that's how I see it. And I think, unless Sam has anything else to add, we're going to move on to our next point, and this is going to be talking about the big progressive wing of when Republicans were in that wing of the political spectrum and now Democrats.
Because it's, if you had, let's go with a 150-year-old male, white, but progressive voter who was eligible to vote in given, let's go, the year 1900. If they were a liberal voter at the time, you'd bet they'd probably vote for the Republicans. I forget who was running in the election of 1900.
Just 1900 or against?
Just 1900.
In 1900? Oh, I don't know.
Yeah. Oh well.
Was it what's his name? McKinley? Was it McKinley? He was around that time. I don't remember.
Okay. But you'd probably bet they'd vote for the. You'd probably bet they'd vote for the Republican nominee. But if you look another, let's go. If we look another 100 years down the line, let's go 80 years down the line. How about the election of 1980? Who was that?
In 1980, it was Jimmy Carter versus Ronald Reagan.
Yeah, you best bet they're going to vote for Jimmy Carter because he's the Democratic nominee.
From Georgia, even a southern state.
And so that's why you can have this preference. They could be a Democratic Republican nominee or the Republican nominee back in the 1900s. It's not that like it's pretty obvious that they'd stay voting liberal. For example, my grandfather, he voted for when he was born in the year 1950, and when he was eligible to vote in the election of 1970, he voted
for Nixon, or 1972 would have been that year. 1972 would have been 68 was Humphrey versus Nixon. There was a third party candidate. I think it was Wallace.
I best believe, unfortunately, he'd vote for Nixon, but
Well, Nixon wasn't that bad. It's just
he wasn't that bad at first.
his foreign policy was pretty good.
Yeah. He voted Nixon at the time, but Nixon was around this time. We can all probably agree that the parties were still in their kind of changing period. But he voted for Nixon, which Nixon was. You couldn't.
He ended the Vietnam War, right?
Yeah, he was a bit more liberal than you'd think, but then he's still currently affiliated as a Republican. But in the general elections, for the past, I'd say since Reagan, has voted all Democrat, even though he's still affiliated with the
Nixon?
No, since Reagan.
Oh, you're talking about your grandfather. Okay.
Has voted all Democrat, and I feel like that's kind of important to point out that he's voted. The parties do change. This is like firsthand experience. So he's always been a liberal voter, even though the parties have changed through those times. I think and he's always been progressive. I think, and looking. You know what I mean?
Yeah, and I think that's a good point because yes, as the parties move forward, so will their voter base. Back when Lyndon B. Johnson signed the Civil Rights Act, when there were Southern Democrats that blocked it, most notably Strom Thurmond, and then George Wallace was a big rejecter of this bill. But then they changed party affiliations for the most part. And then black voters moved in mass numbers from what used to be the Republican Party, now this more conservative, more pro-racial divides, and moved to the Democrat Party, which was the party that put the Civil Rights Act into place. And there's a reason why minorities are now primarily backing the Democrat Party and will probably continue for the foreseeable future. Yes, we lost a big chunk of Latino vote from in 2020 that Hillary Clinton won it by huge, astounding margins that Biden was not able to carry.
As a white guy.
Well, it was mainly because the socialist fake thing in Florida, where Cuban voters were like, okay, we don't want a socialist government, so I'm going to vote for someone that says Biden's the socialist. So I think that's a big thing to understand. And this is another big point I want to make. So Thom Tillis, our North Carolina senator here, he named his dog after Theodore Roosevelt, which is also what I named my dog after. We named our dog after Theodore Roosevelt.
He said it was named after the best Republican.
He said that he only names his dogs, or he said pets, after conservatives. The Twitter comments were pretty nice because they really knocked him down. Because you know what he's most famous for? Founding the Progressive Party, okay? When he lost the Republican... Was it 1908? I don't know, 1912? I think it might have been 19... I'm going to say it's 1912. Woodrow Wilson won that year, but basically what happened is in the Republican convention, Roosevelt won the popular vote. Taft did not. Taft won the nomination, though, because the primary system was really messed up back then. It still is now, but it's a lot better than it used to be because, superdelegates aren't really that fair. But if you think about it, yes, Roosevelt probably should have won that nomination. However, Taft, the incumbent president at the time, which is kind of crazy to think that the incumbent president almost lost a primary for that presidential nomination, which I think Johnson lost his, didn't he, in 1968? I'm pretty sure he lost it. But anyways, Taft won the nomination against Roosevelt. Roosevelt had already been president for I don't know how many years. He did one full term, and then he finished McKinley's term, so I don't really remember how many years that was. However, he ran for the nomination, lost in the convention. However, he founded the New Progressive Party. Their mascot was the moose, I believe. And he won several states, I think he won South Dakota, Michigan. Was it the Bulls? What?
The Bull Moose.
Bull Moose. So it was a moose. I got that one part right. So, yes, he's really famous for founding this progressive party. So I think it's kind of humorous to think that, yes, Thom Tillis named his dog after a progressive without knowing it.
Yeah, and after the best, and he said the best. And he just said a progressive was one of the best presidents, so.
He's very good because you know what Theodore Roosevelt did? But he also raised taxes on big corporations, which Republicans are really against. Right. So I think that's just a big thing to point out about these arguments. And I think we've been going on for a while now, but I think we're going to wrap it up in just a minute. So anyways, thank you for watching. I think that's a pretty good length episodes, 24 minutes long. So anyways, so thank you for watching. We'll see you on Friday for weekly news. We'll see what we have to cover. We don't really know yet. But anyways, we'll see you then. And one thing I want to mention is while we were recording this, I got a notification about Hurricane Ida did hit Louisiana a few minutes ago. Of course, when you're seeing this, it will be in 3 days from now, I think. So if you're in Louisiana, make sure you stay safe, get all your toilet paper, whatever you get from the stores. And
we're here for you.
Right, with 150 miles hour wind, something crazy like that. Hurricane Category 4, I think. Which is crazy. I think they're getting over a foot of rain in New Orleans. But anyways, thank you for watching. See you on Friday for the next episode.